Have you ever felt that silence can be far more terrifying than a scream? I'm not talking about ordinary quiet, but that unsettling stillness that seems to hide secrets in every shadow, as if the air itself were watching from a hidden corner. This isn't just a tale, it's a testimony kept secret for decades by those too afraid to confront what defies explanation. In a secluded rural town nestled deep in the hills of Oregon, veiled in morning mist, stands the old St. Bridget's convent. Locals steer clear of it, and those who do venture near never linger for long. It's said that on the last Friday of every month, something happens there, something the nuns refuse to speak of. Claire, a young postulant from Spokane, had just arrived at the convent. She left her past behind in search of spiritual peace, but found something entirely different. That night marked her first participation in the vow of silence, an ancient ritual in which no sister was allowed to utter a single word from dusk until dawn. Breaking the vow, according to tradition, would invite irreversible spiritual consequences. The atmosphere felt off from early on. The sky turned a smoky grey, and the birds that usually perched high in the trees vanished without a trace. Claire adjusted her veil with uneasy hands as an older nun, Sister Mildred, gestured for her to light the candle for her nightly round. After 10 o'clock, Claire walked alone through the long stone corridors. Her bare footsteps barely made a sound against the old tiles. The flame of her candle wavered in the breeze, sneaking in through poorly latched windows. Every creaking plank and whispering gust made her heartbeat quicken. A scent hung in the air, stale incense, damp stone, and something else, something metallic. As she passed the corridor leading to the main chapel, she froze. She sensed something watching from the far end of the darkness. Forcing herself to look ahead, a cold gust grazed her neck. She shut her eyes, gripping the candlestick tightly, and then she heard it. A faint voice whispered her name. Claire! She opened her eyes wide. No one was there, just the echo of silence, magnified by fear. In that moment, she realized this night would not be like any other. If you love horror stories, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. This is only the first sign that something sinister lurks where faith dares to survive. Claire tried to convince herself that what she heard was just fatigue. It had been a long day, and this was her first night in the ancient convent. Still, something didn't sit right. That voice. It hadn't sounded like a trick of the mind. It was too distinct, too real. She continued her round, reciting silent prayers they had taught her for moments of distress. But even as she focused on the words, the feeling of not being alone crept back. Every shadow seemed to breathe. Every dark corner stared back. The wind picked up, whistling through the cracked stained glass. The candles flickering down the corridor danced, and one, closest to the chapel doors, snuffed out without cause. Claire halted. Something warned her not to approach, but her feet moved forward on their own. When she reached the chapel doors, she found them shut, just as they should have been. Yet a narrow gap revealed a faint glow within. Someone had left a candle burning inside, despite the strict rule that no one should be there at night. She tapped softly with her knuckles, though she knew she wasn't supposed to make a sound. No reply. She glanced around. Absolute silence. The hallway behind her seemed to stretch unnaturally, as if the convent itself was subtly shifting. Swallowing hard, she pushed on the door. It held firm. Then, behind her, something creaked, but it wasn't floorboards. It was the distinct sound of claws tearing through fabric. She spun around, no one, but beside her in the doorway's frame, something new caught her eye. A wooden crucifix hung askew, as if wrenched violently. Claire reached out to straighten it, and pain shot through her palm. She jerked her hand back and looked. Her skin was reddened as if burned, but how? It was just old wood. A low murmur filled the air. It didn't come from one place, but from all directions. Not words, more like a deep, raspy chant repeating itself over and over. Claire backed away, clutching her candle to her chest. Then, with a soft click, the chapel door creaked open just a few inches. The chanting stopped. Claire's candle flickered violently. Through the narrow opening, a shadow moved slowly across the floor, long, crawling, as if something slithered, waiting to be seen. Though every instinct screamed for her to flee, something stronger compelled her forward. Sometimes, the things we don't see are the ones most desperate to be seen. Claire slowly pushed the door open wider, careful not to make a sound, though every nerve in her body was trembling. The wooden threshold moaned beneath her feet. The glow she'd noticed earlier came from a lone candle burning on the altar, something strictly forbidden after dusk. The sisters never left candles lit overnight. It was a firm rule, both for safety and for reasons tied to something older no one dared discuss aloud. Inside, the air was frigid, the scent of melting wax mixed with the must of decayed flowers locked away for too long. The silence was so thick, it seemed to swallow the sound of her breath. She moved carefully, glancing side to side. The statues of saints lining the walls were shrouded in shadow, and their carved eyes appeared to follow her, silently judging her boldness. Then she saw her. Kneeling before the altar was a woman in an old habit, darker than the ones the other sisters wore, nearly black. Her head was bowed low, muttering something Claire couldn't make out. She wasn't moving, just chanting, a prayer, but in a tongue Claire didn't recognize. "Sister," Claire whispered, forgetting the vow of silence for a moment. No response. Claire swallowed hard and stepped closer, within arm's reach. Suddenly the altar candle flared and the figure slowly raised her head. Claire felt her soul recoil. The woman's eyes had no whites, no pupils, just endless black, like bottomless wells. Her skin was pale, nearly translucent, and her mouth stretched into an unnaturally wide grin. Claire tried to scream, but no sound escaped. The terror had frozen her from within. The figure began to rise. Her movements were jerky, as though not controlled by muscles, but something ancient. As she stood fully, her hands emerged from the robe's sleeves, elongated, skeletal fingers with pitch-black sharpened nails. Claire stumbled backward, hitting the prayer bench behind her. Her candle shook violently. The wind surged through the chapel, fierce and unnatural. The doors slammed shut with a deafening bang. She was trapped. The figure took one step, then another, and another. Just as it seemed she would reach Claire, the flame in Claire's candle went out, total darkness, but the sound, that raspy breathing, was still there. Closer and closer still. The darkness inside the chapel felt thick, alive, almost liquid. Claire couldn't see a thing, but she could feel everything. Every vibration in the air, every shift in temperature, every grain brushing her skin. And among that oppressive void, the most horrifying realization hit her. She wasn't the only one breathing. The harsh, uneven exhale grew louder, now just beside her. She tried to move, but her body wouldn't obey. It was as if some unseen force had wrapped around her, locking every muscle. Then, something impossible happened. A voice didn't enter her ears. It slipped directly into her mind. "You no longer belong to yourself. You are no one now." The voice was female, but its tone was warped, as if something far older and darker spoke through it. Claire wanted to scream, but her throat refused to work. The air wouldn't enter. She was frozen between terror and an incomprehensible force. Suddenly images surged into her mind. Unfamiliar corridors shrouded in shadow, twisted faces screaming silently, an inverted crucifix swinging from a chain, and her own eyes reflected in a mirror entirely black. "This isn't real. This isn't real," she repeated in her head over and over. But the voice didn't stop. It kept whispering, prying into the weakest corners of her thoughts. "They chose you, Claire, because you can open the door." Without warning, an invisible force hurled her backward. She hit one of the pews with a loud crack. The altar candle ignited again on its own. The figure was gone. Claire crawled along the floor, tears streaming down her face. She didn't remember how she reached the chapel's entrance, only that she had to get out. She shoved the door with every ounce of strength she had left, and finally stumbled out into the corridor. The silence outside had returned, but it wasn't the same. It was deeper, crueler, as if the entire convent now knew what had happened. The walls seemed to breathe. The statues looked as if they smirked with scorn. Shaking, Claire returned to her room. She locked the door and collapsed onto the floor. The vow of silence no longer mattered. No one could help her. No one should know what she had seen. And yet, on the ground before her bed, something unfamiliar had appeared, a mark drawn in black melted wax, spiraling inward. In the center, her name, written with eerie precision. She hadn't placed it there. No one could have entered, but there it was. And everything had only just begun. Tap the yellow lamp icon and stay with us, so we can uncover deeply disturbing mysteries together. Claire didn't sleep that night. She stayed curled in the furthest corner of her room, her back pressed to the wall, eyes wide open. Every tiny sound, a dripping tap, creaking wood, the flutter of a bat's wings, made her flinch. Her breath was shallow, and her hands still trembled from the memory of what she saw, or thought she saw. But what hurt the most wasn't the vision. It was the certainty that no one would believe her. With dawn, she hoped things would settle. Daylight tends to fool us into believing darkness fades. But when she looked in the mirror, Claire noticed something different. Her right arm, the one she had extended to touch the tilted cross the night before, had a red mark. At first, she assumed it was a burn, but on closer inspection, it had a shape, a cross, inverted. She scrubbed it with soap and water. Nothing. It didn't sting. It didn't hurt. It was simply there, as though it had always been part of her skin. She searched for Sister Mildred to tell her what happened, but she wasn't in the dining hall or the gardens. Oddly, the entire convent seemed emptier than usual. The breakfast bells didn't ring. The other postulants didn't leave their rooms. It was as if she were completely alone. Driven by a strange impulse, she headed to the old refectory, a room abandoned years ago due to dampness. Inside, she found a crucifix lying on the floor. It had been snapped in half, as if someone had thrown it with rage. From the crack, worms were crawling out. Claire recoiled instantly, covering her mouth to keep from screaming. The stench was unbearable. This couldn't be happening, but it was. What once symbolized protection now reeked of rot, corrupted from within. Then she heard it again, her name, not spoken but exhaled like a sigh. Claire! She spun around. The room was empty, but on one of the walls, where a painting of the Virgin Mary used to hang, only the frame remained, and within it, a black cloth stained with something red. Suddenly, vivid images stormed her mind. She saw herself underground, surrounded by voices speaking an impossible tongue, a deep pit at her feet, and a rope snapping as she fell. She gasped back to reality, her heart racing. Her knees buckled. She pressed her hand against the wall to steady herself. She had to get out, find help, escape. But when she reached the convent's main entrance, she saw something that froze her soul. The door was gone. Where once there had been an exit, now there was only a wall. Claire staggered backward in disbelief. She rubbed her eyes, hoping it was an illusion. But no, the main door was gone, replaced by a smooth wall, without frame, lock, or hinges. It was as if the convent had sealed itself from the world. Trembling, she climbed the stairs toward the library. If no one would help her, she'd find answers on her own. She'd always been curious about the convent's archives, but never imagined she'd one day need them to survive. The hallway to the library felt longer than before. The windows were coated in soot from the inside, blocking out daylight. Only her candle's dim glow guided her, casting warped shadows on the walls. When she reached the door, it was ajar. She stepped in slowly, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. The air was stale, as if it hadn't moved in centuries. The shelves brimmed with thick, dust-covered books, most written in Latin. After a few minutes of searching, she found a hidden section behind a displaced cabinet. There, a wooden box held old files and photos of former novices. As she sifted through them, one name leapt out: Sister Aurelia Monroe. The photo was faded, but the face was unmistakable. It was the same woman she'd seen kneeling at the altar. Same dark habit, same hollow expression, same aura of dread. A chill ran up Claire's spine. The records showed that Sister Aurelia had vanished in 1912, on a vow of silence night. The note read, "No signs of struggle." Her room was locked from the inside. Her candle was still lit. She was never seen again. Below it, a handwritten passage from one of the former Mother Superiors. "It is advised the case not be spoken of. Darkness feeds on memory. What happened that night must never be repeated." Claire pressed the document to her chest, feeling as though she'd found a crucial piece of the puzzle. Sister Aurelia hadn't left. She was still there, trapped, or perhaps transformed. Before leaving the library, she glanced once more at the portrait. She noticed something she hadn't seen earlier, a carved symbol in the frame's lower corner. It was the same spiral drawn in wax she had discovered in her room. Panic rose again within her. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't a dream. Everything was connected, and just as she prepared to leave the room, a book fell from the shelf with a soft thump. She turned. The book lay open. Claire stepped closer. A single sentence stood out in dark lettering. "He who sees the bearer must choose between forgetting or surrendering." Still clutching Sister Aurelia's file, Claire exited the library, feeling eyes on her. Something had changed. The walls seemed tighter, the ceilings higher. The convent structure was shifting, as if its very foundation breathed. She decided to try escaping once more. She descended the central staircase toward the lobby, but upon reaching the first floor, she didn't recognize the hallway. It should have led to the dormitories, but instead, it opened to a long, curved corridor with dark lamps and paintings she had never seen. One of the portraits showed a group of nuns. Claire approached. All their faces were completely erased, as if time or something else had wiped away their identities. Below the frame, an inscription read, "Those who crossed the threshold." Claire's candle flickered. She turned to go back, but the hallway remained the same. No matter how many times she turned, she ended up in the same spot. The doors were fake. The windows revealed only stone. Everything was built to keep her inside. She began running, panicked, muttering prayers. But with each step, the air thickened. A low hum began to vibrate in the walls. It wasn't just noise, it was chanting. A deep chorus of feminine voices reciting in ancient Nahuatl, "In Tlacatl Quali, in Tlacatl Quali, the good man, the good man." Claire tripped and fell. At that moment, the lamps lit up one by one with a reddish glow. Not from any bulb, but something unnatural. Around her, shadows on the walls began to move, as if the figures from the paintings had stepped down from their frames. Terrified, she crawled to a barely visible door and pushed her way into a forgotten room, filled with sheet-covered statues, rusted crucifixes, and sacred relics buried in dust. What drew her attention most was the enormous stained glass window in the center of the wall. It didn't show any saint. Instead, it depicted a cloaked figure in a black habit standing atop a spiral with arms outstretched. Around her, black candles burned eternally. That's when Claire realized the figure was Sister Aurelia. She stepped back in horror, and as she did, one of the shrouded statues toppled to the ground with a crash. Beneath the sheet, the stone face staring back at her was identical to her own. Her face. She gasped, the air ripped from her lungs. She fled the room in a panic, running aimlessly, only to find herself back in the same curved hallway where everything had started. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was certainty. The convent was absorbing her, and it was changing her. Claire hid in a storage room tucked behind the old cloister, a cramped space with no windows, filled with broken furniture, moth-eaten linens, and abandoned statues. There, buried in dust and shadows, she found a corner that offered the illusion of safety. She sat on the floor for hours, trembling, struggling to breathe. The convent had become a never-ending maze. Walls shifted, doors vanished. Time lost meaning. In that state of exhaustion, her eyes landed on something in the far corner, an old iron hatch, nearly hidden beneath boxes and fabric. Something inside called to her, not with words, but with a silent pull she couldn't ignore. She cleared the way and opened the hatch. A cold, thick gust escaped, like air trapped underground for centuries. Gripping her candle, she descended a narrow stone staircase. Each step groaned under her bare feet. Her breath echoed unnaturally in the descending darkness. At the bottom, she entered a hidden circular chamber beneath the convent. Symbols carved into the walls surrounded her, some etched in dried blood. At the center stood a volcanic stone altar, encircled by burnt remnants of black candles. There were no crosses, no images of saints. No known god had ever been worshipped here. Upon the altar rested an old book, open to a page marked with a cord of human hair. Claire read what she could. The daughters offered in silence on moonless nights shall open the eternal cycle. None shall escape, all shall return. At the altar's base, two names were engraved, Aurelia Monroe, and beneath it, Claire Hammond, her full name. The world spun. She felt sick, cold, disoriented. She dropped to her knees, barely holding in a scream. How could her name be here? Who carved it? How long had she been part of this covenant? Behind her, something shifted. She spun around. In the dim glow, feminine figures emerged, draped in ancient habits, faceless, gliding silently around the chamber. They didn't walk, they floated. Claire raced up the stairs, heart pounding. When she reached the convent again, everything had changed. The cloister was filled with lit candles, forming a massive spiral. The other postulants stood silently in formation, eyes closed, lips streaked with black wax. The sacrifice had never ended. It had merely awaited someone like her, someone who could remember. Claire stumbled backward, breathless, unsure if she was still in the real world or trapped in a dimension buried beneath stone and shattered faith. The girls remained motionless, living statues with their hands folded in their laps, mouths sealed with waxen threads. She wanted to scream, but what would be the point? No one would hear her. Even if she screamed until her voice tore, that place no longer followed human law. Then the air changed. It thickened, heavier with each breath. From the center of the black candle spiral, something began to manifest. It didn't walk or float, it simply appeared. The figure formed from the shadows, Sister Aurelia, but this time not as a ghost or a fleeting vision. She was solid, real, present. Her expression unchanged, save for a faint, almost invisible smile that lingered without blinking. "Welcome to the end of your will," she said, without moving her lips. The voice echoed inside Claire's chest, as if her heart pulsed each word. "No, I don't want this," Claire whispered, backing away until her spine pressed against a cold column. There was no way out. "The choice is not yours, Claire. You were written, your name carved before you took your first breath. You have been summoned to close the cycle and open the next." The spiral of candles began to turn, the flames spinning as though following silent commands. The other postulants started moving their mouths, chanting in a harsh, inhuman tongue. The floor trembled. Sister Aurelia reached out her hand. It was no longer human. Bony fingers, long and sharp, with grey nails and glowing red veins under translucent skin. She didn't reach to harm, but to invite. "Accept your place. Only then will we all rest." Claire fell to her knees, her mind shattering inside her skull. Part of her longed to surrender, to end it, silence the fear, the agony. But another part still resisted. "And if I refuse?" she whispered. Sister Aurelia bent down, her cold lips inches from Claire's ear. "Then you will remain, forever, without body, without soul, only in the echo of silence." The spiral closed. The fire roared. A crack split open beneath Claire, revealing a bottomless pit of churning shadows. Thousands of glowing eyes blinked up at her, waiting. And in that moment, Claire screamed. But it was already too late. Morning came without warning. Thick clouds hovered over the sky above Willow Hollow. A soft mist coated the ancient stone walls of St. Bridget's convent. Sister Margaret, one of the eldest nuns, was the first to awaken. It struck her as strange. The morning bells hadn't rung. No footsteps of the postulants echoed toward the dining hall. It was far too quiet, even for a vow of silence day. As she moved through the corridors, she noticed many room doors remained closed. No one responded to her knocking. The air smelled of burnt wax, but there was no sign of fire. Only a suffocating stillness, like the building refused to exhale. She reached the main chapel. The door stood ajar. She entered cautiously, her sandals tapping against the stone. What she saw stole the breath from her chest. Every candle had been extinguished, except one. A single flame burned at the altar's center. Its base was stained with a dark substance. In front of it, a letter written in ancient Nahuatl, inked in reddish tones, read, "Another cycle has been sealed. The offering has been accepted." A chill traced Sister Margaret's spine. She rushed to Claire's room. The door wasn't locked. When she opened it, the room was empty. No blanket, no clothes, just a spiral etched into the floor with black wax and a half-melted candle. On the pillow, a lock of dark hair. Margaret couldn't make sense of it. Or maybe she could. She just didn't want to accept it. She returned to the East Wing hallway, where portraits of former postulants hung. One frame, the one that had shown Sister Aurelia the night before, looked different now. The figure remained, but beside her now stood another girl in habit, Claire Hammond. Her face looked calm, but her eyes were completely black. Since that day, on the last Friday of each month, during the night of the vow of silence, the chapel's candles light themselves, the crucifixes hang tilted, and the girls dream of stairs descending deep into the earth. Some say they hear footsteps at 3 a.m. Others whisper about voices calling names in hollow tones. But what terrifies them most is that ever since that night, when someone walks alone down the stone hallway, they hear it. A whisper, soft, persistent, brushing their ear like a breath from beyond. Margaret. Because the echo of Claire never left.